The Jedi series is the mother of all monkey's paw bargains in gaming. Single-player, story-heavy Star Wars gaming series with a big budget, and it's everything we thought we wanted. I know, I was one of them, pre-launch of Fallen Order, eagerly awaiting it. But then the monkey's paw curled shut and we were left to ask, but at what cost? At what cost? I'm not sure any other series has benefited more from a sheer lack of competition since Super Mario Bros. On the Nintendo Entertainment System. Between Visceral getting creative directed into a budgetary casket over ragtag and other ideas facing cancellations over unrealistic expectations like deadlines shows short, I'm not sure how any game could have been released. You'd think any sane person could have known that wouldn't work out, but yeah. So all we had for EA's grand decade of exclusive Star Wars games was Battlefront, Battlefront again, and a budget tier homage to TIE Fighter that has a solid multiplayer but a campaign with its own issues that we'll get to eventually. So of course, the first single-player game attempting a semi-coherent story set in the Star Wars universe would have to sell well because, gosh, there's not really anything else to compete with it. If there's one thing modern Star Wars has taught me, is that you don't have to be Andor to do well commercially. Hell, walking slowly into the middle distance while repeating memeable phrases and recycling old lore is apparently enough to sell people on 3-ish seasons of The Mandalorian. It's depressing, but I won't deny that it's working for the house of buying other people's ideas. You stick a lightsaber in a droid in pretty much anything and people will buy it, even kitchen appliances. Except the deck was seemingly stacked in Jedi Fallen Order's favor. They had pre-controversy KOTOR 2 lead writer Chris Avallone consult on the story set in the dark times. The game itself was being developed by the geniuses behind Titanfall 2, and the project lead was the guy behind God of War 3. Sure, they admitted that the gameplay was built for an original IP at first and they changed it to fit the Star Wars setting, and said project lead turned down the opportunities to resurrect 1313 or Pod Racer, seemingly having no idea how badly people wanted either of those. But still, even with that in mind, they had to have a rock-solid idea for a Jedi game to warrant fighting for it when Lucasfilm were hesitant about greenlighting it. Besides, with tons of reference material to pull from, how could they possibly make an anemic, underwhelming, and weirdly racist story out of that? One where the blandest, whitest Jedi Padawan in the galaxy has to be told by everyone not white how great he is without him really demonstrating said capability beyond massacring stormtroopers and indigenous Dathomirians aplenty to get a MacGuffin. A MacGuffin that he proceeds to destroy so Vader can't have it, even though it's already established that Vader destroyed the original version of the MacGuffin because despite Lucasfilm's bragging, this continuity isn't any less of a mess than the EU was. It's just full of a lot more blank spaces so filmmakers can do whatever they want while no one else can. Which is why nothing in the Jedi series gets to matter, and everyone either dies or fails to accomplish anything meaningful besides making a big bird happy and wasting one of the best new actors in gaming in favor of making the guy who played Joker on Gotham be so understated that you wonder why on earth they hired a man known for chewing the scenery instead of just getting Troy Baker like everyone else. Seriously, if you want someone to just grumble into a microphone, he's just right there.
Hey guys, we're not paying for that.
Gotta imagine he was easier to book. However, as much as I've cringed at Fallen Order's story, writing about it several times over the years, it was a serviceable gameplay tech demo. Is it extremely weird to have any AAA game debut in 2019 with all the coherence of a 2007 launch title for the PS3, especially from a studio that already figured out sci-fi parkour mechanics years ago? Yeah! Still, I've seen far rougher games bounce back. Remember Tomb Raider 2013? Its sequel might have had the narrative subtlety of a Gordon Ramsay gif, but you can't tell me the gameplay didn't improve drastically in Rise of the Tomb Raider. There's no reason a Star Wars game can't do better than Tomb Raider under the auspices of Square Enix. Well, no good reason anyway. Jedi Survivor is big. It takes place on only 3 planets and some smaller space stations, but it took me over 30 hours to near 75% completion, and that's me ignoring an absolute crap load of things for BD1 to scan and goatees and crates I was never going to customize returning protagonist Cal, what is emoting Kestis, with. What's frustrating is that you can see the potential for Survivor to be a dramatic improvement over what came before. Every now and then you see these glimmers of Jedi Knight, The Force Unleashed, and even stuff out of the Tartakovsky miniseries. But it's lost in an ocean of capital C content. And that word is just utterly exhausting to even say at this point, especially with this franchise. The Jedi Order is gone, the Empire is everywhere, but nothing can stop one half-trained Padawan from outing himself and getting everyone around him killed so he can sulk some more, even more so than sometimes Batman. Sure, it's the Dark Times era, but if there's one defining feature of Cal Kestis, it's that he's so damn broody while giving off the energy of a sad puppy that he's got more in common with Lightning from Final Fantasy XIII than an actually likable character. Eventually, he starts to demonstrate a personality in Survivor, even if it's not particularly charming, it's at least a personality, even if it is very generic. For a series desperately trying to insist that Cal is this grand hero on paper, the dude isn't exactly stable or ideal as a candidate for continuing the Jedi way. Like, maybe I'm just crazy, but a former child soldier raised by a monastic order with problematic philosophies about stoicism, who has immense amounts of PTSD that he still hasn't really dealt with, and who associates killing as pretty much the solution for everything, isn't maybe my first choice for continuing the Jedi Order. Especially after he pulled a Skywalker last time and wiped out the entire ethnic Dathomirian tribe because, instead of trying to be diplomatic, he just threatened their leader and then repeatedly fought them after 3 times they told him, no, go away. But don't worry, Survivor breezes over that and ships him with said Night Sister because anything problematic in Fallen Order is just breezed over or retconned with off-screen character development that we never really saw but we're told definitely happened. Other characters also undergo this weird personality lobotomy where they're just suddenly wildly different than what they were before. It really makes a liberal use of that time jump without really ever making substantial use of it other than to try and pretend that less than ideal things didn't happen. Like, for comparison's sake, Kyle Katarn is also a crazy mother criffer, but because he's brave enough to see through the Empire's lies, follow through and join the rebellion, and then takes on the inner turmoil that is wielding the light and dark sides of the Force simultaneously once he realizes he's Force sensitive and even owning up to his mistakes. He processes grief and finds love just like Kestis, but the difference is that the story doesn't beat you over the head with it with dozens of cutscenes just to get the same point across. Instead, you usually have just a single, far more emotional performance in a campy FMV scene or purely in voiceover while dealing with Quake 3's limited animation set. You don't have to be big and over the top to get a point across, with people screaming at each other or going through elaborate plots to convey your message and themes. This is Star Wars. Being concise isn't a bad thing. I'll let you guess which approach Survivor takes.
Not until the Jedi Council gave the order to abandon Tanalorr and then refused to counterattack.
They gave up on it?
Yes. It was my discovery, my home, and they just expected me to throw it away.
Dagon, wait.
I refused to obey and was betrayed by the one I trusted most. No,
stop!
What have you done?
What makes this all the more exasperating is how hard Survivor tries to replace Katarn with Kestis. His default outfit already looks a bit like the character, but you can cosplay as Kyle Katarn, on top of Kestis getting a pistol. The combat is still too stiff to really be like the Jedi Knight games, but if you disable the auto lock on camera and really squint, you can see how it could have been that. Well, if the series could stop riffing on Nintendo's homework, that is. So remember how Fallen Order is a Metroidvania Souls-like? Well, Survivor is a Metroidvania Souls-like Zelda clone, because the inevitable outcome of this series is become nothing but an infinite list of collectibles, backtracking, and things to scan until the heat death of the universe. As a bonus, not every planet is a series of giant death pits this time, plus if you go into the settings, you can turn off that awful thing where it makes you lose health for falling in death pits in a game that otherwise has Souls-like combat and healing, and still somewhat finicky platforming controls that sometimes just decide they're not interested in double jumping in the middle of a lengthy string of hazards. Who cares if there's not a checkpoint in the middle of it? Plus, for some weird reason, they decided to make everything take time unless you use the fast travel. Like, elevators actually take real time to travel. Normally in a game they would just be like a quick loading screen or something, but no, you can watch on the map. You are really having to ride for sometimes on the verge of half a minute, because screw pacing. But hey, you don't fall through the floor this time around, so there's that. Instead, you can spend hours riding animals, fighting mobs of enemies, cutting down grass, breaking pots for collectibles, and navigating mini dungeons left by ancient Jedi of the discount KOTOR but not really books. You know, the ones with such gems of prose as the hum of his blade made Bell think of all these things at once. He suspected the marauders they were rapidly nearing assigned an entirely different meaning to the sound. He thought it probably sounded like consequences. And boy howdy are the hills alive with the sound of consequences in Jedi Survivor. The big differentiator from Zelda's formula are the lingering elements of Fallen Order, though they're more like ghosts haunting what could have otherwise been a genuinely focused game. I can understand looking to other games for inspiration, but they need to coherently click together, and that's the fundamental issue with Survivor. It's really just a random pile of Lego bricks. Sure, sometimes they'll assemble into something fun, but most of the time you're just sifting through or being frustrated because you can't find the one or two pieces that should be there that realistically in any other circumstance would be there. And it's not like it's an ambitious mess like Fallout New Vegas or Vampire, but a very, very calculated, safe mess that feels tailor-made to appeal to as many people as possible, even if that means whole sections aren't for certain types of players. It's all acceptable enough for most people to not take issue with, but also equally forgettable enough that the second you're done with whatever you're encountering, it's already left your mind. You've already forgotten it. There are some sections with so much platforming, it'll annoy the crap out of Souls-like fans. When it's not that, it's time to play, is this the death pit or the way to go? It's a great game for the whole family, especially if you have any disposable aerodynamic cousins. There are other parts where the game just decides to absolutely beat the crap out of you, and fights you'd think would be hard are suddenly pushovers. It's so wildly inconsistent. Ooh, hey, what if we surprise the player with an optional boss by not so much making it optional the first time that they confront it, and then they lose their experience points because they weren't prepared. Because, you know, we've made them actually take even longer than last time, so it can feel like it's taking forever to acquire them, and the only perk to increase them requires collectibles that are tricky to find at first. Ooh, hey, what if we surprise the player with an optional boss by not so much making it optional the first time that they confront it and lose their experience points again? Hey, what if? The level design can be open world 1 minute, then extremely linear the next. Some whole abilities can be rendered useless for sizable chunks of the story until a different faction engages you. There's one extended puzzle sequence, then the rest are so optional that you can still get the same rewards just by killing large monsters or platforming around. The thing is, I pity anyone trying to platinum this game, trying to engage with all of it, because there's just so much filler that grants you nothing but useless cosmetics or lore that's so threadbare in presentation that you'd be better off browsing Wikipedia anyway for any kind of explanation. And yeah, oh my gosh, BD1 loves to scan everything under the sun. Imagine if, instead, he just scanned things automatically. I can't imagine it would be that hard to implement since you'll walk past all these scannable things to begin with, instead of making the player run back through dozens of canyons and military bases to stare at random inanimate objects for like 3 sentences of exposition. The only benefit is that you get a little bit more experience points, or if you're scanning an enemy, you can use them in the auto battle or minigame, which is poorly balanced, but you know, you can at least have some mindless fun with it, just throwing a bunch of big enemies at another person's big enemies. Here's a thought. Instead of worrying about the extra experience points and all of that, how about we just stop being stingy with the experience points? Because I mean, after you grab all the health and mana boosts, the game just starts giving you additional experience points anyway with any more of the weird, I don't know, force crystals? Because yeah, I remember that, the ancient Jedi art of crystal meth. it's not like more interesting options of side content don't exist. You've got what can be best described as reverse bounty hunting. And as ludicrous as the Kobo Matter puzzle mechanic is, it's at least creative and encourages abstract thinking. Recruiting people to hang out and live at Rambler's Reach gives you a tangible feeling of bringing people together, watching a community come alive. Without even doing everything in the game, I filled out damn near every single skill slot I wanted, with points to spare. There's a trimmed down version of this game that would have been so much more pleasant to go through that I could see it, and it would have been pleasant, at least from a mechanical standpoint, but there's just so much extra fluff that you're just constantly combing and brushing it away to try to get through to the heart of the matter. Cause you know what? We don't need a gardening minigame where a weird, I'm not even sure what that is, gives us useless poetry about each of the plants. Or a second explorable hub that's mostly small mazes and empty expanses of sand. Or Super Meat Boy platforming bonus levels that are utterly masochistic. Or 3 different central plots, all trying to convince you that they're going to be one single narrative, because nothing in this game can ever just stay on target unless it's bringing back that stupid frog. If the gameplay is an incredibly unfocused mishmash of good and bad ideas, then the story is even rougher. I get that somehow, for some people, Cal Kestis didn't come off as a questionable lead that I wouldn't personally trust with a pet rock, but my word, even ignoring all the things he did before, he's so all over the place in Survivor. He goes from saying that dead clones that were bred against their will to hunt Jedi deserve what they got, to suddenly, finally wondering if maybe being a wrecking ball of vengeance isn't exactly embodying the Jedi way. But then, you see, he decides he wants to finally get around to boinking Marin, and she says she won't let him go over to the dark side, even though that's literally part of the Force that the Night Sisters harness, because what even is consistency? Except he still does use the dark side, like both of this game's random as hell antagonists, Jedi Sephiroth and Discount Ray Romano as Jango Fett by way of Joel of The Last of Us. Yes, it's cool that Raymond Fett over here had a wife who was respectfully portrayed as an Arab woman with the hijab and everything. It'd be even better if she was more than a static picture, let alone being used in the story more as an excuse to justify him turning into a raging madman who doesn't listen to reason and apparently is just Griffin Starkiller on The Force Unleashed despite being a Jedi intelligence agent, because the whole "this is more grounded" premise sure went out the window for this series quickly. And I know it seems like we're jumping around a lot, but I'm not kidding here when I say 90% of what happens in the story doesn't actually matter. Most of the best written conversations and characters are wholly optional, and one of the antagonist's motivations isn't explained until you find a Force Echo in a cave hours after he's dead. Yes, Toa is charming, and at least it's funny watching people make fun of Turgle, but I still don't even know what Darth Fabio is on about. He wants to get to Tanalorr, this safe haven planet on the other side of a space rift, but the Nihil from the High Republic era attacked, so the rest of the Jedi along with him abandoned him, and he went bonkers because, let me check my notes here. Can you say a wizard did it if the character themselves is the wizard? Because wow, is Deacon Guerra just undercooked? I'm not kidding, there's just nothing there. It's not like he couldn't have come back to the planet back when it was his era if this was his big concern. Instead, he's just so inexplicably far gone that he outright murders other Jedi over a planet that was just supposed to be made for an outpost in his era, and now during the Dark Times could make a decent hiding place from the Empire. Granted, all Bode uses to justify his super telegraphed heel turn is he has a daughter, like it's Spider-Man 3 all over again. He's willing to throw everything away because despite his wife demonstrating that it's on their generation to make the sacrifice so their daughter and future generations can see the sunrise she and her husband never will, because for one brief second you can see them actually try to capture the energy of Andor and there's a real chance for saying something, but nah, let's just have Bode behave like a raving lunatic who's somehow harder to fight than Darth Vader. Oh yeah, and Seer's in the game for about 10 seconds. Her master is alive, oh but look, now he's dead again. And now she's dead because continuity, otherwise she would have whooped Vader's ass like he was made of tinfoil. We should feel sad about this, but seemingly in order to imbue Cal with any form of personality, Seer spends the majority of her time having almost none until the section where we play as her that's really neat, yet is never repeated despite Merrin standing around as a perfect alternate playable character, because if there's one thing this series loves to do, it's dangle an infinitely better option in front of me and keep it out of arm's reach. Everyone tries their best, except for a couple of extras in the background on Rambler's Reach. I do want to note that the cast is putting in the effort. I pity the antagonists because they have almost nothing to work with. But they try. They really, really try. But you know what? Even with a meandering plot that struggles to justify half of its points or its objectives that you go on in any manner other than hurling you off somewhere else so quickly that you don't have time to process it, like it's the Rise of Skywalker, I could let that go if at least there was some major payoff. But by the end of the story, what's really changed other than Seer being dead? Remember when we started the game fighting the Empire and helping other rebels? What even happened with that? Because either the intro was written last and they just retroactively introduced a way better premise that they never planned on using, or this story massively lost the plot faster than a jump to light speed. I'm not even sure Cal sent Saw Gerrera the intel half a dozen people died for. The Hidden Path get discussed, but we don't meet them outside of Seer's little archival group on Jedha. Even the tie-in book Battle Scars mostly exists to establish that Merrin is pansexual and very much nothing else, other than just moving the dial along for most of the cast. Even Vader practically breaks the fourth wall to call this entire exercise pointless, which just wow. But hey, Cal and Merrin kiss, like 3 times, which is basically softcore for Star Wars. Well, these days at least, and neither of them dies in the process, so it's still ahead of The Rise of Skywalker, but genuinely nothing about the setting has changed that really matters, because they keep just either killing off the original characters or jamming in ones with predetermined destinies so nothing can happen to them. It's like Kenobi all over again. It just raises more questions by not letting these characters exist on their own. Maybe if, I don't know, we hadn't killed off the main antagonist at the end of the first game, this story could have gone somewhere. Or if Deacon Guerra wasn't a raving lunatic. If Bode actually relented and grew as a person. If anyone other than Cal Kestis was allowed to have their own agency and do something with it while we are actually playing the game. I've seen some people say that the story is really about obsession, but even that doesn't quite fit the amorphous blob of threads going in so many directions, only to take us to, well, now Cal and Merrin have to raise and train a young Force sensitive and build a base on a place in the middle of nowhere that will likely totally get wrecked in the next game because every new Jedi game has to open with a new disaster now, I guess. I mean, if Zay from Battlefront 2 Resurrection only paid off in what can be considered one of the worst tie-in books in an era of average is better than taking risks storytelling in the new EU, then I don't even want to guess what the future holds for Kata. To be fair, her actor does a good job, even if the kid has a surreal amount of emotional maturity for someone who's, what, maybe 6 or 7 years old? The thing that really irks me the most, though, that's maybe just a personal thing, but still just really weird, how much more interesting a story it feels like we were walking into during the prologue. Everyone is charming, well acted, and has a lot more potential to challenge Cal as a character, and seems to actually integrate better with him as characters, drawing more of a performance out of him. So of course they're systematically killed off as soon as possible. Even the ninth sister, who was one of the major highlights of the first game, is just treated like a disposable diaper, as a glorified tutorial in boss fight form? Plus Cal treats killing her as releasing her as some sort of weird way of trying to justify that death is the only way for Inquisitors to be free, I guess? What sort of fatalist nonsense is this? I get it, it's the dark times. Nobody's really got hope yet that they'll stop the Empire, but even the literal Dark Time comics from the last continuity, which saw people being killed off, eaten, turned into rat ghouls, and all sorts of other things, still had protagonists striving to be better, show empathy, and restore some peace and sense of order where they could. That's the point of this era. Being the better person is the greatest struggle in these moments. Except, I'm not sure that Cal is anywhere close to that kind of balance. He only exhibits empathy when the story really needs him to, and the rest of the time, gives off a very unnerving vibe of being a walking, talking lightsaber that solves everything by cutting first and asking questions later. This is from the studio that brought us Titanfall 2, one of the best told stories in gaming, which made you care about a random piece of military hardware as a person. To see the exact opposite result by seemingly accident is really concerning. I wanted Jedi Survivor to prove me wrong, to show that Fallen Order was just a messy first swing. You can still see that attention to detail in the presentation, most of the sound design, and the rock-solid score. It's not that the game is unplayable, it's not that you won't get some entertainment out of it, but Jedi continues to benefit incredibly from the dramatically low bar that is anything released after Rise of Skywalker and the poorly received Battlefront games. This isn't the second coming of Star Wars games. It's very mid. I was so done by the end. Wherever this series goes next, I'm not concerning myself with it. It's very clear that this is just going to be how they're going to do things, and I don't need that. Ever since 2008, I have been patiently waiting to see if Star Wars would ever get its act together again. After the astounding collaborative efforts of the new Jedi Order, Shadows of the Empire, The Force Unleashed, and the original Clone Wars project, it's just exhausting watching Lucasfilm throw darts at a wall with seemingly everything these days. Each time I see a ray of hope that they'll figure things out, that they're finally going to have some kind of coherent plan, I'm disappointed. I see praise heaped upon them for retreading stuff a handful of nerdy authors in the 90s and 2000s figured out years ago, often with greater payoff and with bolder representation because they executed elaborate ideas that actually went somewhere. Nowadays, it feels like every other setting has figured this out better, be it Avatar, Transformers, Mass Effect, or Resident Evil. Is Survivor shiny? Yeah. Is it a reasonable enough piece of entertainment that you can absolutely distract yourself from the decline of late-stage capitalism for a couple hours? Probably. Is it the best thing that you can do with this setting, especially in gaming? This isn't even the best Respawn can do.